It's now 6:36 and we will now go ahead and start this meeting. All board members except for Trustee King are present. Trustee King has been excused for tonight. I will now entertain a motion to adopt tonight's agenda with the amendment of removal of item D and E, being that we did not have closed session, so that was an error on our end.
I move to approve our agenda with the amendment of removing item D and E.
So the flag salute's not in here, but do we go ahead and honor it? Yeah, so please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. We did not have a closed session item, so we don't have a public comment for that portion, but I will honor public comment if there is anyone here tonight that's wishing to speak on something that is not on tonight's agenda. Being that there's no public comment, we'll go ahead and close public comment and we will move on to our information and discussion.
So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We have a special presentation tonight with Christy White, who's an independent auditor that the Monterey County Office of Education is supporting us with as in regards to this unification study and a feasibility study. So Christy White is here with us this evening. Are we starting with Christy or Marguerite or with Dr. Gus? Okay, so Dr. Gus, thank you.
Members, community members, and staff, it's a great pleasure to be with you here this evening to share information about the feasibility of possible unification in the future if that is the direction that the districts involved would like to go. So this evening, we have with us both Marguerite Leone, who is our legal counsel, sorry, I can't speak tonight, it's been a long day, for unification matters. And then we also have, as you so eloquently stated, we have Christy White with us this evening, and Christy has been digging in deeply to all of the districts that are being talked about tonight, just looking deeply into their finances, into their current structure, and she will be sharing with you the information that she found through her deep dive. If there are any questions on Christy's information, we're going to be happy to entertain those questions at the end of her presentation. And if there are any questions about legal matters as it relates to unification, we have Marguerite here to answer those questions for us this evening. And so with that, I will turn it right over to Christy to present her findings. Thank you. Christy?
Thank you, Dr. Gus, and it's a pleasure to be here, board members and superintendent and public. I've had the pleasure of being here in King City and getting to know this community and the schools here. And so it's been quite a nice time that I've had, and everyone's so welcoming and all the information that you've provided. So I have a presentation. There's also this very large report. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I think there are some extra copies or they'll be posted on the website at a later point. We can hold the questions till the end, or if a board member would like to ask a question on a particular slide as I'm going through it, please feel free. There's a lot of material here, and so it's a very complex area. And with that, I'll ask your AV person to go to the first slide. Okay, so kind of what is the scope of this study and how did we get here tonight? So it evaluates a hypothetical, so I want to point that out. There's no current petition right now to unify the King City Union School District with the portion of South Monterey County Joint Union High School District that overlaps the boundaries of King City, as well as the small districts, so Bradley and San Antonio and San Ardo and San Lucas, right? Creating a unified district. Kind of running parallel is the most recent study that I did on Greenfield and that unification. And there actually is a petition out there to unify Greenfield. It's about 10 years old. It was a citizens petition. It is sitting at the State Board of Education, and an action will be taken on that, we expect, in the next couple of months. So I was asked to look at, okay, what would a King City Unified School District look like, and would it substantially meet the state's criteria? So that was my scope of work, and we're going to go through each of the 9 criteria that the state has for any school district reorganization, including unification, all right? So in this report, the assumption is that the high school district would dissolve and there'd be 2 unified school districts. So there'd no longer be a high school district, all right? And in my study that I did in April and presented to the high school district board, as well as many of you were probably there, the recommendation was if there was to be school district reorganization, it really should be 2 unified districts and not creating 1 unified and then leaving like a remnant smaller high school district that would be less likely to be fiscally viable and promote, a good educational program as a result, that there'd be strength through unification. And so again, that's what is studied here. So next slide, please. Okay, so I solicited input from the high school district, and I was here a couple of weeks ago meeting with staff and some board members and union representatives to gather and do my research for this report. There's also an awful lot of information online, and so I researched that as well. And then, of course, the County Office of Education provides anything I need. All right, next slide. So these are the state's 9 criteria. So at the end of the day, the state wants to make sure that there's viable school district, right? One that is of an adequate size. We're going to go through these in more detail. One that is based on community, what your identity as a community. There needs to be an equitable division of assets and debts, so that we're talking about the high school district, because there would no longer be a high school district, right? That the petition cannot promote racial or ethnic discrimination or segregation. There cannot be an increase in costs to the state as a result of this. There has to be a sound educational program without significant disruption to that program. There cannot be a substantial increase in cost for facilities. The petition cannot be designed to increase property values, which is not the case here in what we're looking at. And then the 9th one is there cannot be a substantial negative fiscal impact. So essentially, you have a district that's kind of viable from day one, right? Okay, next slide, please. So first, just about process. Remember I said that there is no petition right now to unify, but the way a petition gets created is by several different options. One is that the school boards of the affected districts, so it would be the high school in King City and Greenfield, and even the small districts would have an opportunity to opt in or out, could pass a resolution by the majority of the board members on each board to unify. And that starts the process. So that's not the end of the process. That just starts the process. It starts more study, analysis. It starts public hearings that are held in each of the area, and ultimately goes to the County Committee on School District Organization, which is under Dr. Gus's jurisdiction, who decides whether or not the petition substantially meets the criteria and calls then for an election. So none of this has started yet and may not. It's really up to all of you. Another way that a petition can get started is another governmental entity could pass a resolution. So city council, for example, could do that, or even a fire district or a water district or any other governmental entity. The third is a citizen's petition. So 25% or more of the registered voters in an area can sign a petition to unify. And that's what you have in Greenfield right now. That was a citizen's petition. Okay, so once the process gets started, again, you can see there's several different steps it has to go through, and it takes months. And the effective date, let's say it's successful and approved, even still, it would be a year or two out. So it's not a short process. And again, subject to many levels of review. Next slide. All right. So I said earlier that in the April report, the recommendation is that there be 2 districts that unify if you are going to do a unification. So instead of it just being Greenfield and leaving this remnant high school district, it would be better financially, educationally, and other ways to create a King City unified at the same time. And each unified has its own comprehensive high schools, and we're going to talk about those a little bit more. You each have strong community identities, right? And you, in a unified district, could have articulation, transitional kindergarten through 12th grade, so there's educational advantages to a unified school district. And each would be of a fairly nice size, 4,600 in Greenfield and about 3,900 here in King City, based on current student numbers. There can be cost savings, obviously, through the consolidation of administration, and my study focuses on that quite a bit under the financial part. And as you can imagine, when there's 2 or more superintendents and boards and administrators at the district level, there's opportunities to consolidate. Now, you might need some additional support positions and things like that, but there's, I believe, demonstrable evidence that there would be savings from administrative services. And you'd have a common district for parent communications. We have one school calendar. Our student records are all in the same system, that kind of thing. So that's the rationale behind doing this study. And if you go to the next slide, please. This is just a map, which looks familiar. And you can see that Greenfield there in blue would be a unified school district. And then the rest of the territory, the green areas even down all the way till you hit Paso Robles, would be a King City unified. So it's a very large territory geography-wise. And you'll find later on when we get into some of the facilities and the bonds and things like that, that there's a lot of assessed valuation property value in that area that is disproportionately large compared to Greenfield. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now we're just going to go through the criteria. And the first is there has to be a minimum of 1,501 pupils in order to unify. And clearly at 3,850, a King City unified would meet that threshold. All right, next slide. The criteria is that the districts are organized on substantial community identity. And so looking at the geography of where King City is in proximity to Greenfield and other communities, looking at the demographics, language, your wonderful, very rich traditions and heritage, a lot of history here in this area, the economic ties to employment, your shared resources and organizations that support the community. All of that point to the hallmarks of community identity. And in my opinion, the criteria is met. All right, next slide. Okay, the next criteria is division of assets and debt. So the state says if you are going to divide a school district, in this case, we're talking about the high school district, then there has to be an equitable division of the assets and the liabilities of, in this case, the high school district. And it has to be equitable, and it's the task of the county committee to ensure that that happens. And there's methods and there's means to do that provided in the law. And at the same time, it allows for negotiation as well. So the general rule is that real property goes where it's located. That makes sense. You wouldn't own, as a school district, property in another school district, right? So in this case, Greenfield High, which is in Greenfield, would become the property of a Greenfield Unified School District. King City High, Portola Butler, the continuation high, as well as Pinnacle Coastal Valley, and the district office are all located here in King City, and those have become the property of King City Unified. And the elementary districts, of course, that property is wrapped into the unified too. Because keep in mind, when you have a unification, this is an entirely new government. This is an entirely new legal organization, right? So there's no longer an elementary and a high school. There's a unified school district. New board election, right? Hiring administrators. And we'll talk a little bit more about employees and how employees are affected and protected under the law. Okay. So real property goes where by location. In general, these are the general rules. Other assets are shared proportionate to either assessed valuation, which is basically the value of the properties, real properties in the area, or by average daily attendance, which is a per pupil number. So, for example, the ending reserves in the funds of the high school district would be divided based on proportional ADA, kind of how the funds are, earned. And, student funds would stay wherever the student body is at each of the high schools. Certain funds, such as vested employee related, would go where essentially the employees go. But there are alternative methods that can be used to ensure that there's equity in this process. Okay, next slide. Okay, so currently, the way the numbers line up is that the assessed valuation of real property in the South Monterey High School District, which encompasses all of Greenfield, all of King City, and then the small districts, would be divided 69%, it would be in the King City Unified School District, okay? Much bigger area, remember we saw that? And then 31% is in the Greenfield area. Now, ADA-wise or per pupil-wise, we're a little more 50-50. So King City Unified would be about 46%, including the small districts, because they would now be part of that unified for at least secondary purposes. They can opt out for elementary if they desire. But for secondary, they would be included in the unified. And then 54%, so there's a few more pupils in Greenfield, right? Okay, so that's the general rule on how it's divided. Now, one thing that had been problematic in the past, and it's still not fully resolved, but it's on its way to being resolved in the next few years, and that is the outstanding state loan, which was refinanced into the iBank loan. And it's set to be paid off in August of 2029. So that's just 4 years from now. The high school district has funds set aside to repay that. It does need to be repaid or refinanced if there's a unification. But the high school district and the other elementary districts are in good financial condition. So this is no longer a barrier to unification. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about bonds. It gets interesting here. First of all, there's different requirements regarding keeping under debt limits after unification. And in the analysis that I've done based on today and the bonds that have been authorized and could be issued or will be issued, so I kind of looked at them in total, you would stay under the threshold that makes you eligible for unification, okay? The elementary districts get to keep the bond proceeds for your original projects, right? Because that's what the voters voted for. So Measure L, which is King City's most current bond measure, you have a bunch of projects that will fund, those would not be affected, and the funding cannot be siphoned off onto other projects. And the same in Greenfield. But the high school district bonds are split between the two areas. That makes sense, right? So they're split either by the proportionate assessed valuation or by where the funds are used. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And there's no automatic kind of reapportionment of all of these bonds unless there's a new vote called. So things are pretty much status quo after unification, with the exception of how do we divide these high school bonds. So next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the high school bonds. So as recent as a year ago, measures H and I were passed, and the high school district has budgeted projects in each of these communities. And if you look at their project schedules, it's really 50-50. Now, the timing could be different. So maybe they started a project in Greenfield and they finished it there, and now they're going to move over to King City, and then they're going to, so the timing could be different. But the overall master plan, which I think there's an excerpt in this report, shows that it's really 50-50. And which makes sense. You have the two communities, you have the two high schools. The high schools are fairly close in size, right? So you want nice facilities for all the kids in each of the school. Okay. So that was just recently passed. Those bonds have not been issued, or they haven't been fully issued by any means, but they will be because they've been authorized. Measure R and Q, there's some remaining funds to be spent right now, but they were also spent 50-50 between the two communities and the schools. Now, construction of Greenfield High School, that happened back in 1998, and those bonds have fully been paid off, so there's no debt there. And so that would not be added to the equation here that we're going to talk about. And the high school, there may have been many reasons to build it, but one was certainly to avoid overcrowding. Each of the campuses has about 1,300 students, so you can imagine it'd be a very large school if it were all on one campus. And the statewide average is essentially the average that you have today on each of those campuses. All right, next slide. Okay, so the general rule, which I think I mentioned, is that bonded debt, this affects taxpayers here, most of you in the room, would be split by proportionate assessed valuation or where the funds are spent. So if it were split by assessed valuation, there would be no changes to the way that the taxpayers are taxed, all right? But to the extent that the debt is tied to actual improvements that are greater than what would be divided based on proportionate AV, then a change could be proposed to the tax rolls to equalize that, all right? So I am not a lawyer. The lawyer's sitting right here. So she will grab me hopefully if I make a misstatement, but there is a law that says that in dividing bonded indebtedness, it's the greater of either proportionate assessed valuation or where the funds were spent. So the high school district's been spending the funds 50-50 between the communities, but because Greenfield has a lower assessed valuation of 31% compared to 69% here in King City, an equitable division under this education code, which ultimately is not decided by me here today, but by a county committee and further review down the line, would mean that a portion of that debt would be transferred to Greenfield and their taxpayers. So there'd actually be an increase in taxes in Greenfield and a decrease in taxes here. So I did an estimate, don't hold me to it, back of the envelope, but it could be around $100 per 100,000 in assessed valuation. So that would be a way of equalizing where the money was spent versus who is paying for that, right? Okay. All right, next slide. So another consideration with bonding is you have to stay within the limits, what they call bonding capacity. And so for an elementary district, a high school district, you each have a bonding capacity of 1.25% of assessed valuation. And when you unify, you double that. So it's 2.5%. If all the bonds I was talking about that the high school district has, plus the elementary districts have, were all issued today, which they haven't been, you would exceed that cap. King City wouldn't exceed it by much, Greenfield by more. And which doesn't, affect really the ability to unify. It only would affect the ability to issue new bonds until you're back under that bonding capacity. But that's my assumption, is that everything is issued, everything is being spent at the same time. But in reality, it's spent over time as you need the money for the different projects that you're completing. But it is something we need to test because there is a hard cap of 5%. You can't exceed 5%. And in this case, under today's assumptions, you would not. So again, that wouldn't disallow or negate this unification. All right. If bonds have not been authorized, so if they've been authorized but not issued, then that's split by assessed valuation. So that would be 69% for King City would get the authorization to issue bonds and 31% to Greenfield. All right, next slide. So in looking at all this, the conclusion is an equitable division of assets and debt could be achieved, and this criteria is met. All right, next slide. All right, number 4. The unification needs to preserve the district's ability to educate pupils in an integrated environment and not promote racial or ethnic discrimination or segregation. So what we're talking about is consolidating TK through 12 into 2 districts. And the major districts being the high school, King City, and Greenfield have very similar racial and ethnic profiles, trends, and it's primarily Hispanic, and that wouldn't change with the unified districts. The small districts have proportionately smaller number of pupils, of course, and already integrate at the secondary level, which would continue to be the same post-unification. So this criteria is deemed to be met. Okay, next slide. All right. This criteria says any reorganization cannot result in a significant increase in cost to the state. So there would be no additional cost to the state. There's a recalculation of the funding models. That's all allowable. Frankly, I don't think they would change at all, or a very small amount. And even if that, it would probably be a little bit to the positive. So this criteria is met. Next. Okay, education, the new districts, so 2 hypothetical new unified districts would need to promote sound educational performance and not significantly disrupt the current programs, all right? So this really focuses on the programs that you're offering, kind of statewide testing results, talk to a lot of educators, and then just looking at a unified TK through 12 model of education. Next slide. So all of the districts have good educational programs today, and you have some excellent ones that have really been successful in your district, like dual language immersion here in this district. All the districts want the best for the kids. So what could be benefits for a K-12 unification? The primary one is a positive articulation between the grade levels. So as the students move through, for example, 8th grade into 9th grade, that there's integration of the curriculum and where they're at, so the high school can meet them where they're at. There's also potential for better transition support from grade to grade as a result, and kind of knowing the student, owning the student, if you will, through their whole kindergarten through 12th grade, if you're fortunate to have them for the whole time. There's common school calendars and the parent communications. I think that's probably one of the big ones too. You only have one school system with its board policies and procedures and communications as opposed to 2. And then we'll get into finances in a minute, but if you have the financial ability, then there's no reason you couldn't keep the best of programs. There is going to be a new board, so it's not going to be the high school board running the unified district. It's not going to be the elementary board. It's going to be a new board. It would be elected at the time when unification's decided. Many of the existing board members could run, new ones could also run. You could even expand the board from 5 to 7 members. But as long as there's the financial ability, then keeping the best programs would be an option that the board would have. And then just community-centered school identity. So we're King City, we are King City Unified. Okay, next slide. Okay, what programs would be cut, or would they be cut? And the answer is no, not directly due to unification, because as we're going to see under criteria 9, there's no loss of funding. In fact, it's estimated that administrative cost could save up to $3.5 million a year. And those dollars would be freed up to support or perhaps even expand programs. So a new board would be created, it would have its priorities and decide these resource allocations. All right, next slide. So for criteria 6 on education, the conclusion is it's substantially met in this 2 unified school district scenario. All right, next slide. School housing costs, the criteria says there cannot be a significant increase in school facilities cost. Well, because you have the high school district here in Greenfield and one here in King City, of course you have all the elementary schools, they're all being folded into the unified. The unification is not going to create any additional need for school facilities. And in fact, you have these bonds that are improving these facilities. So overall, the facilities are adequate, and especially with the ongoing campus improvements. So this criteria would be met. Next slide, please. Number 8, the state says you cannot primarily design a unification to increase your property values. This really talks about when a developer comes in and they're trying to maybe sell the homes for more because they're in one district versus another, which is not the case here at all. So this criteria is met. And then the 9th criteria and last is fiscal management and status. The proposed reorganization must continue to promote sound fiscal management and not cause a substantial negative effect on the proposed districts. So in this case, the unification of Greenfield, unification of King City. So some key points here that came out of the study. First of all the school districts are financially stable, which is good, and have meet or exceed the state's minimum reserves. The high school district has the funds to pay off the iBank loan. There's no loss of funding from the state's apportionment models. So you're going to continue to get the funding at each pupil, whether they're in kindergarten or in high school, has a certain amount of money the state will pay to educate them. And the more senior grades get more money than the elementary grades. All of that is blended together. There's no loss of funding. All right. And eligibility for, grants and things of that nature would remain unchanged. Okay, next. Okay, so just to reiterate, LCFF, that's the local control funding formula. It's how schools are primarily funded by the state. There would be no change, if anything, maybe a slight improvement. But overall, in budgeting the revenues for a new unified school district, the dollars are there to serve the students that are there. All right, next slide. Okay. Now, getting into what happens with staffing, which is important to obviously all of the employees in the affected school district and the communities. There's a lot of law in this area, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just going to kind of go over the highlights here, knowing that there'll be a new unified district school board who will negotiate new contracts with the new unions, and that includes salary schedules and so forth. But there are some protections in the law too, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So essentially, if staff are assigned to a school site, whether they're classified or teaching staff, they become employees of wherever they're assigned when unification happens. So for the King City teachers who are here assigned in King City, whether they're elementary or at the high school, they'll continue to be assigned for the elementary or the high school, all right? Classified district level staff can choose, because they're not assigned to a school site, right? So they can choose between the two unified districts where they want to be employed. And I looked at that because we can't really predict which district they might choose to be employed by if they are at the high school and they're serving both communities. But in the lead up to unification, some of those predictions can be better predicted, and they can be reassigned. So there's the right to reasonable reassignment. Some people might retire, all kinds of things like that could happen. Classified staff have a 2-year right to their job, their salary, their benefits after the unification. So for 2 years, they're protected. And that's whether they're classified staff or they are management, regardless of their position. The certificated bargaining unit, they have protection for their classification. So their seniority, their tenure, their placement on the salary schedule in the new unified district. Certificated management does not have the protections beyond their contract terms. So if it's an annual contract, that's as long as their protection is, including superintendents. So again, overall, the unified board is going to make many decisions, including negotiating new contracts and making reasonable reassignments to accommodate people and to make sure they're following what is required by law. Okay, next slide. So in creating the new salary schedules, it's not a requirement to create new contracts that are the best of both. And in fact, it's probably not affordable, particularly in the short term, because there are differences. For example, looking at the teacher's salary schedule alone, there's $900,000 difference if the elementary teachers were placed on that salary schedule. On the flip side, there's very good benefits and low class size here at the elementary district. And so those things would need to be kind of considered by the new boards. There are ways, and it's complicated, and it requires legal minds to put it all together, but there are ways to, and in fact, you have to do it with classified staff. You cannot reduce their pay. And so it's a process known as Y rating, which is basically you don't get a cut. We're going to honor what you're being paid. And then at some point, the salary schedule catches up or however it's been constructed. So it's a bit of a puzzle creating it, but it's part of the process. And to kind of help to facilitate this, keep in mind that there are tools. First of all, there's administrative cost savings, which could be, again, as much as maybe $3.5 million. And also tools such as early retirement incentives, maybe not filling vacancies leading up to the unification and so forth. Okay, next slide. So how does a budget get put together for this hypothetical new unified district? Well, the revenues are the same. That doesn't change. So then we have to look at the expenditure side of the budget, which is mostly comprised of staffing. The FTEs, full-time equivalent, at each of the high schools is equal. I mean, it's absolutely equal between the two. But there are a little more senior staff at the high school. So there is currently a difference when you look at the cost of about 5.6% more in cost for the staffing at the high school. But that's today. And so we don't really know if and when a unification were to happen, if that would still be the same. So that would need to be, that number there needs to be kind of taken into consideration. And that's where potentially the administrative cost savings could come into play, or maybe other tools, again, early retirement incentives, or even negotiating between the two districts in the division of assets and debt. Well, we're taking on more costs here, how are we compensated, that kind of thing. So, but it can be sorted out, if you will. All right, next slide. So what are some of these areas of administrative cost savings that I've talked about? Well, I compared based on the size and similar funding model for a King City unified. I compared it to other unified school districts in the state, and it showed that there's a potential for just administrative functions of 1.9 to 2.4 million. And then when adding in some of the centralized operations, it could be up to 3.5. So that's where I got that 3.5. So we're talking about superintendent and board, central office, management of certain operational functions. But we do have that 2-year protection for classified staff. So all that savings, that potential savings of 3.5 million can't be realized day one. But approximately 1.6 million could be realized for those that aren't in that protected class, and then the additional 1.9 million 2 years later. But in practice, this is where good planning leading up is essential, right? So to try to make it as minimally disruptive, creating, efficient, effective, unified school district with the dollars that you are able to free up from these cost savings. Okay, next slide. So to summarize the conclusions in this report, the potential outcomes is the single administration, which we just talked about with the savings, the articulation of a K-12 program, vertical articulation, transition support, expansion of signature programs like dual language immersion, and the ability to track students in a single educational system. There's opportunity for improved resource allocation, coordinating staff development, recruitment, greater ability to hire a full-time person over a part-time person because you have a bigger budget that you're dealing with, and you could potentially deploy them, K-12 as opposed to K-8 or 9-12. And more flexibility with facilities use, one district office. Another potential outcome is stronger community ties, engagement with the single school system. And then for King City and the taxpayers, there's a probable reduction in taxes as a result of how the bonds are divided. So overall, I would say that, to kind of leave you with this, is that good leadership and cooperation would be required if this district and the others proceed to integrate the school cultures, to keep the morale high, to build on the best of old and new programs, and to keep financial stability through the transition years. All right, and that's it. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions, or any, Marguerite, if you have a legal question, you can ask her. So.
Is there any questions or comments from any members of the audience or the board?
I'll go ahead and.
So just for clarification, when you say that classifying choice will have an option of going to either of the two districts, clarification, you're talking about the high school going, correct?
Correct, because classified staff that are assigned to a school site would remain at the school site they're assigned. It's only the district-wide employees who aren't assigned.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. White, for your presentation. I had the opportunity to meet with you, so some of my questions might not relate to this, or we can go from there. So on the report that we received on page 16, it does state about like the decline of enrollment that's happening currently in the elementary level, the high school seeing a higher increase in enrollment. Keeping that in mind and looking down the road in a couple of years, unification is going to happen. If it happens, looking at down the year, could this create a mismatch in resources where we're forced to cut back on early learning programs, even though that's where long-term outcome starts? Could that be a potential?
Not as a result of unification. So there's always challenges with declining enrollment in any school district and what you can afford because your budget has been reduced. So that happens regardless of whether you're unified or not. If anything, unified might give you more resources because there's more students and you're under a single administration without duplicative administration. That answers your question.
Okay, and then, so one of the questions that I actually asked you at the day we met on page 18, it reinforces the question that parents often confuse the two districts. From your perspective, how does the confusion actually affect students? Do they miss out on services or face barriers when moving between schools?
Right. Well, currently, the educators in the room could probably speak better, and the superintendents. But having two student information systems that don't talk to each other is going to affect kind of the flow, the transition from one school district to another. So like from 8th grade into 9th grade, so having a common system, having common policies, common safety plans, means of communication, all of that in a single system would be facilitated kind of better. Mhm.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments at this moment?
I do have a question. If the state board approves unification in Greenville, starts their process, and for whatever the reason, you don't get together here,
And I might ask Dr. Gus to come up and speak to that too. But if there isn't a unification here, then the high school district would lose half its students. And there'd be still two administrations here, so there'd be no cost savings to offset the cost. So it would create financial pressure on the high school district, and which would also affect the educational program. Okay, all right. Okay.
And we don't know what direction the state board will take. We also don't know if this particular petition that we considered at the state board, if that one is a no-go, there's also the possibility of another petition coming forward again, and it just starts the process. And then again, the timeline of this. So I can't really answer that one specifically.
Margaret? Yeah, I did want to say also that from a transparency perspective, all of this is set forth in a study that has been performed similar to this for the Greenfield unification. And that is available on the superintendent's website. And that study analyzes what happens to the high school district with the single unification of Greenfield and how that situation would be affected with a dual unification. So it's there to be reviewed. And as Dr. Gus says, we don't know what the state board is going to do, but we do know that this unification is at the heart of the identity of the Greenfield Elementary School District, and we will be back with a petition.
At the end of the day, though, it would be up to the state to decide, well, they can force it onto us if this is what they would like, or they could also say it's gonna be done locally, and you all, as districts, would be deciding.
At this point, I'm sorry, the Greenfield petition, thank you, Christy. At this point, the Greenfield petition will be decided by the State Board of Education. It is not going to come back locally. If a new petition starts up, there is an opportunity all along in the process for that new petition to be handled locally.
Yeah, but we should probably add to that, this conversation about whether or not King City Elementary School District would want to unify with King City High School if the other unification moves forward. This would not be decided at the state. The question, I think, here is, are the two districts interested in making that decision for themselves? And of course, both of those two districts would have to have that conversation and make that decision, because there is no petition for this district at this moment.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question. The state board will not force unification on this district.
Any other questions or comments? Is there more on the report, or are we just on the Q&A portion of it?
So Dr. Gus, I know in the last spring's presentations, we had multiple presentations. This evening, it's just this one, correct? And then our
Yes.
discussion.
Yes, because you already received a copy of Marguerite's presentation, and that was about the legal process as it relates to unification matters.
Right.
And so, but if there are any, again, any legal questions that lingered from those prior presentations, we do have Marguerite here tonight to answer those.
So that's it on the presentations. But again, if you want to hear a review of the process, we have that available. And then I know that there are more questions here.
So thank you for having the time, taking the time to come and present to our community as well. Yes, this is not the easiest conversation to have, although it's a much needed conversation to have. I don't think that the King City Elementary School District has ever been in denial about wanting to have a solid foundation when it comes down to having a TK to 12 or 14 or 16, whatever other grade levels are added in the near future. And I can't speak for every board member up here, but I could take the time to go ahead and say that I think when it comes down to the reasoning for why we locally here should, and I don't want to say consider, because as mentioned, I think it's fundamental, but time and place for us is, essential. And there was a lot of assuming that this, assuming that that. So assuming that all goes well is what I'm hearing is feasible. And not to be a negative person, but there was about 20 years ago, if not a little less, that we were not necessarily unified, but we had shared service with the high school entity. And when financial struggle hit, our elementary district hurt. In fact, it hurt so much that we have yet to reinstate a lot of those services. And busing is one of them, in case that has been in the back burner for so long that it's been forgotten. I came in back in those days. I know the struggle, I know the loss that happened, and that is still, it impacted the community, it impacted the students at the time, it impacted the students since then. I'm having a hard time to just sit here and just take the positive, the what if it goes well, and not take any consideration of what if funding is cut further down the line. What does that do to some of the programming? Because although we don't have a secondary program, a lot of times when cuts come down the line on us, there's a lot of programs that we can't cut in certain high school programming. And the first impacts are felt at the elementary level. In King City, we have spent numerous amount of years recently trying to rebuild culture, rebuild our district, become stronger with community ties, bridge that from home to school gap. And we have so much more work to do, but it has been a struggle even working within our own, and I know it's cliche, but I call us a family. But we've seen the struggles working amongst ourselves. And to hear the time frame sound of 2027, it's still down the line. It's not really that down the line. And I guess I'm pointing out the fact that we don't necessarily have to unify overnight in order to start building that TK-12 foundation, being that we're local. I mean, I know there's so much more discussion to have, and even though we have no control over what happens in our sister community of Greenville, I am having a hard time saying because they're doing it or because they feel that the shoe is right for them right now, that we need to jump on that. Because again, we mentioned the DLI, but it would be oblivious to me to think that that is not going to be one of the first things to go if there's any kind of financial burden down the line. When we look at the financial funding struggles or challenges that we're going to have up ahead, it's the funding that most of our kids need. And I feel like we need to take those things into consideration because there is fights that I feel we need to start preparing for, possibly. So not that we're opposed or that I'm opposed to the discussion of unification. I think we have to be a little bit more realistic with the timeline because I am afraid, I'm concerned with the time frame of 2027. I think that we can start bridging that gap, not just between home and school, but also between 8th and 9th grade. And we don't need to unify overnight. We are literally in the same community as mentioned, and we're unique, we're King City. So we can start working with our high school. I hear talk about how, why should we pay off the funding? We don't need to pay off the funding, but when we owe the state, we were under state receivership. And although we've gained most of our control back, we still have state control because we still owe the state. So that's an incentive if you guys really wanted to push that ball going, but I'm not in a rush, as mentioned. 2029 is a better number than 2027. It allows for that real building of community between not just the outside members and various households. When I see this, there's some selling points, right? We've all been to a car lot. We've all been to a car lot. They're gonna try to tell you all those good points about that car. They want you to drive it off that lot. They might not be as open with some of the cons, but you're gonna hear all about the pros. And that's what I feel this is. This is a lot of pros, but there's no cons. And because there's no cons, if we oppose, it's gonna look like we're just against things. But again, there's so much history that is not in this report. There's so much history that's still running through us right now as we're trying to rebuild our small elementary district. So we're not opposed to the unification of the elementary with our local high school. For us, I think it's a matter of, let's do it, but let's do it right. Let's take our time. Let's really talk about the impact, because if we really think that this won't impact the students that are currently going through the system, we're wrong. We've seen it impact students before, because what's not being discussed is the actual struggles that we might come across when we are unifying, when we are dividing assets. It's like a divorce. Even if both sides are wanting to get divorced, there's still gonna be the division of things. And even though it sounds good because we're right now in agreement, sometimes when push comes to shove, it's not as neat as it is on paper. And when those things start to happen, it starts to impact the students. When we look at motives to unify, right? The first one is cost saving, which is fine. But then the second one is the articulation of the educational program, which in my humble opinion should be the first reason why we start talking about unification, right? Students first. Yeah. So this right here is not fitting my criteria of what's number one. Again, not opposed to the unification. I think that our talking points are going to be more with time frames that are more suitable for the current federal and financial climate, whether it's federal or state, and also ensuring that as this process continues, that we're not just taking care of the adult needs, we're taking care of the number one, and that's the students. That's just my 2 cents. I think I'm gonna go ahead and see if anybody else wants to.
I'm gonna go ahead and piggyback a little bit on what she said. As you guys heard some of my questions, for me, more than anything, I am new on the board, but for me, we're trying to look out for what's best for our students. And I think that's our key factor at this point. We're trying to see what's best, and we share students, and that's the thing, we do share students. We have exciting programs going on here. I just got on the board last year, they were able to open DLI. And I think that's one of our main factors that we're trying to take care of that DLI program, which we're barely into second year. We just opened up first grade this year, and our plan is to grow it. and we don't know. It's uncertain. We can see what's on paper, and what's on paper is always going to be the good, and it's always the fear. We have to trust the system, and sometimes we've seen flaws in the system, and that's where we're trying to get everything together. We're trying to work through it and see what is the best outcome for all of our students. Whether it's unifying, working together, and like Vina was saying, we're not against it. We're just trying to see, gather everything. That's why this study was made. Because we saw the study that, showed Greenfield and the high school unify. We were included in bits and pieces, but we wanted to get more in depth on what that meant for us. And like Vina was saying, we want to see the pros and the cons, because we know everything has the good and the bad. And we have to put in a balance and see what's going to outweigh and how can we serve our kids better. And I think that's just our main focus, trying to serve our kids better, whether it's elementary, high school. I know the high school has, and they've been doing the best, whatever they can, to provide those services. And we've been doing the same thing. We've been working with our family engagement. We've been bringing keynote speakers. We service the same families. They all get the same information, and it's always been open to the public. We try to get as much information out on social media because we're trying to bridge that gap with different family engagements, whether it's Consuelo, whether it's Dr. Rios. That's our main focus. And so that's what we want to just emphasize, that our focus throughout this whole process is the student. That's who we're looking out for at this point, and we're seeing what is going to be the best outcome for the students. And so we just want to let that be clear, that we're not opposed or anything. We're just trying to see what is the best outcome for each of our students at every level. We don't we lost busing. We haven't been able to get busing. For the ones who are from here, you guys have heard that the schools, Shalom Peaks, why don't we have a bus to transport our students? Why can't we get a bus? And it's something that we've been trying to work on, and it hasn't been feasible. So we're trying to do what's best, and we're trying to work through it and see what is going to be the best outcome for our students. So I just wanted I wanted to set that clear, that I personally am not opposed to it. I'm just trying to get the balance to see what way can we do it to where we're not going to impact our students. We know that initially we won't lose any funding, but that's only guaranteed for a couple years. Looking down the line, we're facing deficit, I think, in our projected totals. And so eventually, we have small class sizes. Is that also going to be a factor in unification? Going back to where fourth grade had about 30 kids. I think right now we're at a decent 24, if I'm not mistaken, around there per student. And that we've been able to do it due to our current situation. So I just wanted to set that on the record, just to know that I'm not against it. I'm just trying to see which way it's going to work out best for our students and the community who we serve.
Maybe I misunderstood, and I would like to apologize in the sense of, I thought when it came, and no offense to you, thank you for the presentation. I was under the understanding that when we would be receiving a study, it would be seeing it both ways, seeing both sides of the coin. This is what is beneficial for your district, and this is how it wouldn't work. So that's what I thought would be brought into play, not so much of, again, like he said, not saying that we wouldn't unify, but it's just, I'm visual as well, and I like to see the pros and cons of things. One of the things as well, we had talked briefly before was, if the high school were to stay on their own, how would it look like for them? Again, our kids transition over to the high school. That's important, because at the end of the day, all the elementary kids will be transitioning over to the high school. That's already a given. But knowing how is it that they're going to look like, what's going to be the impact for that school if they were to remain on their own? Again, it was just all something that I thought would be part of the presentation, as well as what would be the fiscal impact for them in general, if there were to be outliers, and then what would be the pros and cons if we were unified. So that's what I was looking forward towards tonight. Again, not saying that we would not agree to it, but it would just give us more to look into, more information, because we are pro kids more than anything. And we do have new programs that just came on board. So it's just, we're trying to see what is best. not for us as adults, but for our kids.
Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to ask questions or make comments?
That presentation, we're happy to get that, but what the impact would be with the unification for the year, so that comes to the high school all by itself, which I think that's what they're really looking to do, into the high school. That impact is other.
Which is great, but it was something I believe, again, under my understanding, that we would be receiving here as well. So our district families and teachers would hear it for us and our district. That was I know that was presented over there. We are part of those meetings as well. I wasn't able to attend the one in Greenfield, but again, that's the whole purpose of us having our own meeting for our own district parents and teachers and all those involved. It was within our district. What would be that impact here? And for them to hear it with our community. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that what was brought out over there, it's just with us here tonight. Because I'm not sure how many of people tonight went to that meeting over for Greenfield and, that's what I was saying. The expectation for me, I thought it was going to be presented here as well.
Where did the 2027 timeframe come from? Like, where did that, like, that was just a drop it in the, if you guys would have, if you probably would have more buy-in on our end if it was at least like a 5-year timeframe. But that whole 2027, we're just like, oh, that's like worse than 90 Day Fiance. So there wouldn't be you haven't heard if there's any opposition to like that time being set a little bit further out?
If the two districts, the high school district and the elementary district, decided to pass resolutions, which is the version of a petition, then in your resolutions, then you could list your hopeful timeline, knowing full well that sometimes the timeline you might be looking for might take a little bit longer because of some of the steps in the process, like the case study and, if there's an election and all of those.
Now, for that, would all 3 districts need to be making that, or could King City and the high school go into those resolutions?
The King City Elementary District and South Monterey Joint Union High School District would have passed those resolutions. And then in the other community, again, we don't know how the state board will, what action they will take on the existing petition. But if that existing petition does not pass at that time, then they could do the same thing. Both districts could pass resolutions and if everybody was in sync about the timing, then again, you could pretty much in the resolutions indicate the timing that you're hoping for, but knowing full well if there's elections, if there's an appeal to the state board, those kinds of things could cause delays. So it wouldn't be earlier than what we're proposing, but it could be later than what we're proposing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just by way of example, the petition for the Greenfield district has been sitting at the state board of education for 7 years. And if it is approved and goes to election, has to be that election timing, and then there is a period of time after the election, assuming it passes, where the new district gets up and running and there's an overlap of scores, et cetera. I think the 2027 has been discussed because if Greenfield were on the ballot in 2026, there is a provision in code that would make that unification effective in 2027. That provision can be waived. So I think the 2027 is relative to the pending.
So if Greenfield, assuming they move forward, right, and it's approved at the state level, and they can go ahead and start next year, being unified or 2027, would that, if we're still looking at wanting to do a time frame extension, how would that impact the high school at that point? Because at this point, it's a standalone high school, and we also don't want to go down trying to save it, so that's why we're wanting to make sure that everything is being done. So we want to take our time in this new establishment of relationship. So,
A little bit of a premature question because we don't know what the state board is going to do. And it's going to act in November. And it could accelerate discussions if it approves the Greenfield unification. If it is denied, everybody gets back on the same page and says, how do we move forward with that? Greenfield will continue to push for unification. But it's a little bit of your question now, and may require some waivers, et cetera, to pull this all together.
okay, there's some information to have at the October meeting, or more so. And then also, as far as, they're small communities, so it's no secret that some of us wear multiple hats. How is the involvement of us as elected or voting pieces go with having any other involvement as far as union leadership during this discussion and voting process, or possible bringing this up to a vote? Say that there's board members that sit on one board but work for the other, or the district that is being discussed in unity. Is there any conflict of interest?
So there are board members on the high school board from the other communities. There is no FPPC financial conflict of interest in that at all. Is there a common law conflict? Probably not.
So if we have a voting member that's also a leader in a union, that is not a conflict of interest?
No.
Okay. We'll have to look into that. 'Cause I'm sure there's other agencies out there that think that's a conflict of interest. What's funny? Somebody want to share the joke?
If we unify. So if we unify. Right. This was for unification.
Union leadership changes, yes. The board changes, yes. Each board gets to vote. Oh, is that current? You have a how is that? Then if the union president. That's why the.
So,
Everything changes.
correct, each board votes, each board will be voting individually, correct?
Any other questions or comments?
In the report. It's the April 2025 report, and so I would take a look at that. But that was the big focal point of that report, because essentially 50% of the students would be gone. They'd be in a Greenfield Unified. But the high school district is running the same administration. There's protections for the classified management. They can't be let go for 2 years, even though it's half the size of the district, right? Still have your superintendent, your board, all your other leadership positions in place. So you don't get that cost savings from administration that I talked about. And so that would put financial pressure on the district. And if they did make cuts, it could be in areas they don't want to make cuts, which include obviously educational program or program support at the district level. I think because of the size of the high school district as it is now, they've been able to build out a nice management, team. And so to lose half their kids, you cannot afford that. Whereas if they unify K-12, you have the same.
This is some of your
Yeah.
comments from your
Oh,
PowerPoint
thank you.
presentation.
Yeah, there's also questions about unlike a unification, if the territory was to be split off, King City High School could elect, the teachers there could elect to stay at King City High and be employed by their original district, which is South Monterey, or they could elect to go to Greenfield. So there's the potential for a lot more movement in terms of salaries, which can be financially challenging to deal with. And probably more likely, more would elect to stay here in this community. And in fact, some of the high school teachers in Greenfield could elect to come and work here in King City. So that would not be at play in a unification, because the staff, because there's no more original district, the high school district dissolves. So it's where you are assigned to work. And it's really only the few classified managers that have some flexibility. So yeah, we ran the numbers in this report in April, and it showed that it would put significant financial pressure on this district. And so the district right now, the high school district's in good financial condition. You wouldn't want to jeopardize that. And, your students go to this high school. So King City would be the one that would most likely be on the short end of the stick if that were to happen. Yes.
Could you share a scenario if Greenfield chooses to unify, King City chooses not to unify, high school does go under financial hardship, and what happens to the students if the high school can't survive?
Right. Well, the worst case scenario is they'd be thrown back into receivership with the state and be asking for another loan, which is not something that you would want to have happen, right?
But most likely, the board would not want to fall back under receivership, and so they would have to make reductions
Right.
to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's why it goes back to the educational
Mhm.
programs. You have less money, there's less you can offer, and that could impact the full educational program as you know it today. Which is, I think what Christie's point was in both of these reports is if two unifications occur, then you're not losing half your student population, because you might be losing it, but then you're gaining it when you unify. So both districts and both communities, if they were unified, would have similar numbers of students and then be able to maintain those educational programs
as you know them today, or at least closer to what you know them today. And of course, we're talking a bit hypothetical here because both districts would have a new board, new leadership, and so it would be the decisions of that new board and that new leadership as to how to maintain those educational programs to best serve the students in each of the communities. So a little bit challenging when you're talking about hypotheticals, but that is what prompted this conversation in the first place, is as the Greenfield petition was moving forward, Mike Fine from FICMAT, his concern that he shared in a letter to the state board was that the I-bank loan is an issue, and it would be better if both communities had unified districts so that you're not leaving one single high school on its own. So anyway, that's kind of where it stands now. And as Christy mentioned, that I-bank loan issue, that was a much greater issue in the past when the unification was studied all those years ago, is kind of in a different situation now because it is very close to being paid off and the district is in a much better financial position than if there was a need to pay it off.
Well, there are a lot of infrastructure differences between the high school and the elementary district that will cost money. I don't see that reflected in the report, and that's a concern. Because we're going to continue to move forward with our education program and help the students that really want to. The whole overall global picture is going to have to be the same. And it's being preached that, yeah, you'll have one administration, your curriculum will be the same, but what about all the infrastructure to support it?
I can speak to that a little bit. So, the facilities would go where they're located, and the bonds, we talked about the bonds, those are the primary source of modernization and all of that. And so those would be divided between the two communities. So, I don't see that unification would cause any stress on those. You have to maybe consolidate. So instead of having this district office and the one down the street, there'd be one. There'd be a savings to that actually, because I think this is leased here, for example. But- Question? Yeah.
So in your scenario, the first thing you're waiting for is for the state to give their decision on things. If the state says yes to that, that then puts it to a voter election, correct? But what you're really asking at that point for, or pushing for, is then for all three districts to do a resolution that kind of bypasses that election process, or not?
No. Greenfield, if it's approved, will stay on its individual. If Greenfield is approved by the state board, then there is not a local threesome that is going to override that. And Greenfield will proceed to election on the schedule set forth in code. It can be modified a bit.
Why I'm
But-
asking is because would make a statement that high school staff then at that point could possibly choose. Or
Yes.
whatever, or it is set that even the certificated basically get to choose which way they go.
Yes.
But yet, what you said, when you do the unification, there's no.
I don't want to speak for Christy, but I think the choice is gone when there are two unifications, because there is not a high school district any longer where you can choose to remain. But when there is a unification of only one of the communities, of only one of the elementary districts, then the area remains to be served by three districts, a unified district, an elementary, and a high school district. And those classified and actually certificated who are at the high school district can choose to remain there, which could potentially increase costs. we don't know how that's going to roll out. But that is one possible scenario. And these negatives are set forth in the Greenfield feasibility study. And I think they were they are in the study for this district as well, because there are scenarios where higher paid employees choose to are located at one district or the other, and preparations aren't made to be able to absorb that. That is, and the differential in salary scale is highlighted. So yes, there are negatives set forth in the report. But this choice situation only comes up if there remains 3 districts in this area. I'm not counting the little rural districts, but is that correct?
Yes.
Can you clarify? So in November at the state board meeting, is it simply a no or a yes? Or is there an option for them to say yes once the iBank loan is paid off? Meaning the state board.
My understanding of the state board, and you correct me, Marguerite, is they can do whatever they want. Yes, and I'm trying to think where we were just recently where that was made clear. So when the county committee is reviewing reorganization matters, we have to look at the criteria that you heard Christy present tonight. They have to determine, would each of these elements be sufficiently met? So even the wording there is, it's not, nothing's 100% until you do it, and then you see. But when you're looking at a proposed either territory transfer or a unification matter, they're looking at the 9 criteria and would they be sufficiently or significantly met. Once the matter gets to the state board, they can take other factors into account. I am guessing that financial stability of all the districts concerned is going to be their number one concern, as it should be, because you don't want any cost to the state. That's one of the criteria. And if you were to do a unification that would create any kind of need for then the state to give you a loan, then there is going to be a cost to the state. So that's probably going to be one of the major criteria that they look at. But at the end of the day, they can make the decision that they want to make.
And to, again, clarify, because it had come up a couple of times. So when for November with the state board, when they're looking at all the districts concerned, they are only looking at Greenfield Union and South Monterey County. Because we at this point are not a part of that.
Correct.
So then I think it's safe to say, from my assumption of what I'm understanding up here is, and I'm putting it out there, it sounds that we are open to consideration and discussion of unification with King City or South Monterey District, South Monterey County District being King City here. However, we have our own type of terms and conditions, and with that term and condition is we're thinking of all the King City students, both elementary and high school, and how we can start bridging that. We would love to start making those efforts without needing the unification, because we can start aligning our calendars without having to be unified, and we can start as soon as next year. So let's start some of these discussions that don't need the harder parts. Let's start bridging that 8th to 9th grade gap, so that when this does become that strive to move, we at least have a more solid foundation to start stepping on. But to really think that within a year and a half to 2 years that we're going to be able to put this all together, have a solid foundation, and it's not going to impact anybody negatively. Even if we get inherited the salaries, are we not talking about the possibility of having some layoffs happen in the 2 years, depending on where these staffs go? Like, we're not talking about the real things that we need to be talking about. And as mentioned, I really feel that we have a lot of other financial concerns coming down the road that we need to prepare for the sake of our current students right now, both in elementary and high school. So I see that our fellow high school boards here, we welcome you. We welcome the discussion. We're open to the discussion. We're open to the possibility, but realistically, that whole 2027, that is a big turnoff for us. That is a that is a big turnoff for us. So that's just little things to consider, because I know that we will be meeting again in October, and I would love to have a more deeper discussion with more facts, with more two-sided views, because it's reality. We want reality-based facts, not just what's the good that might happen, but the real effects, cause and effect that might happen when things go wrong, if they go wrong. And in the business that we're in, we usually hear about more of the wrongs than the rights. And again, I can't stress enough just the climate out there, the federal climate, the state climate, the battles that we're gonna have to go to try to secure our funding for these upcoming years. This kind of movement is scary to be discussing right now during these uncertain times. But again, I want to assure that everyone knows that we're totally more than open to discussing and having that possible unification happen sooner than later, but we're not in that rush. We are not trying to bypass a lot of other things. We want to have open forums that might take forever, but we want to be as transparent as we can. So I don't mean to step on anybody's toes when I ask the questions that I ask. I just want to make sure that it's out there, that just in case there's any doubt on what's causing our movement or our hesitation, there's 101 things, but primarily we're also focused on the right now and on the continuing to grow right now. And as we talk and discuss the inheritance of this, or the unity of this and growing our family, right? We want to ensure that we're doing it for the right reasons and not because it was something that was forced on either one of us, because that's not going to be the right thing for any of the students. All we hear about is a lot of the adult needs. To really have this be a transparent discussion, I want to start hearing about the student impact, both good and bad. All this is wishful thinking. A lot of this is wishful thinking. And it's good. That's some way to, get motivated and inspired. But I also am a bit of a realist. And I also want to know the reality of things, because when we do come to vote, I want to make sure that I have everything that I need to make that vote to the best of my ability for the sake of these kids. Anybody else have anything else to add? Any questions? Board, administration? Come on, somebody has to say something after me. Jennifer, I'll let you take it over.
Okay, so as Trustee Paramo said, we will be continuing the discussion in October. I'm going to make an assumption that we have a lot of people that are really thinking through everything they've heard tonight, because we do have a lot of our own staff members here in the room this evening that are hearing the information for the first time, may not have had a chance to read through the reports yet. I do encourage you to go back to South Monterey County's website. Dr. Cota, was it the April meeting that they'll find it attached? You can find it online. It is attached, as well as our report this evening, to look through both of those, because again, in October, when we have that joint board meeting, you will again have a chance to ask lots of questions and be a part of that discussion that the high school board and our board will be having about this. It's another special board meeting. It's not a decision-making evening. It is continuing this discussion, which I think, as we've heard, thank you, Dr. Gus and your team, for being here, because all of that information will be very important when they go to the state board meeting as well in November. So again, while King City Union is not a part of what is being discussed in November, we all realize that we are a part of the larger discussion. So it's very wise of us to be very involved at this time as we move forward. So I thank you for being here tonight and joining us for this, but I think everyone needs to think a little further, have some time to process in preparation for our meeting in October.
With that said, we'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight and spending this time with us, and we welcome you back in our October meeting and at any of our other board meetings if you'd like to join us. I know half of you will. But at this point, our next regular board meeting will be this Wednesday. As Jennifer mentioned, we have that special board meeting in alliance with our King City High School on October 14th. And then that will be followed by a regular October meeting on the 15th. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I move we adjourn tonight's meeting.
All in favor? Aye. Thanks again for coming, and you guys get home safe.
Have a good night.